Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It is Tuesday, October 15th, 2013, halfway through the month, coming up on Halloween. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. Jim Traficant is supposed to be phoning into, or we're supposed to be talking to him in our third hour. He is on the road, though, so we're going to have to be hunting down correct phone lines and everything, but he is scheduled to be on the show in our third hour today. We have a lot of stuff to talk about. The phone lines are open. 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Craig, the new guy, is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, feeding the mutant hamster in that little wire wheel that generates the electricity for RBN, ready to answer the phone when you call on in with your commentary about what's going on. Now, over in Washington, D.C., the official response to the weekend's protest from the White House continues to be, ho-hum, was something going on. The barricades, new term of craft, are back in place in front of all the national monuments. They're spending more money keeping those barricades up than they would have spent just leaving the monuments open to be enjoyed by those veterans whose monument it is. But we're basically in a situation where the White House is operating out of a sense of their ego. By golly, when I say the monuments will be closed, they'll be closed no matter how many tax dollars it's going to cost to make that point here. And it's just a reminder that all of this shutdown really isn't about saving money, because despite the very draconian cuts to those parts of the government that you really like, the vast majority of spending into defense, into the war machine, into the NSA spying, propping up Wall Street, propping up Israel, that continues unimpeded. The government is trying to punish you uppity Americans for refusing to go deeper into debt to save the banking system by taking away those parts of the nation that you want and enjoy and demand. And again, those public monuments and national parks do not belong to the federal government. They are the collective property of we, the American people. The government is the hired caretaker to take the trash out, sweep the parking lots, make sure everything's okay. And if the government doesn't want to do that, that's fine. They can leave. Volunteers will take over. State governments are already taking over. But the government does not actually have a legal right to deny Americans access to the property of the American people. They're just doing it to spite you, to get you to go along with raising the debt ceiling and plunging your children and grandchildren deeper into more unpayable debt than you're struggling to deal with right now. That's what this is all about. Now, I saw this interesting story. This was over at TaylorMarsh.com. It's actually been picked up all over the place. Apparently, during the protest in front of the White House by the World War II veterans, one man showed up waving a Confederate flag. Completely inappropriate to what was the whole point of the protest, which is shutting down the monuments and treating our military veterans very poorly. But, of course, that is what the corporate media focused on. Oh, it's a Confederate flag. It proves those protesters are racist and their opposition to Obamacare is because they can't stand a black president. Forgetting that, at least in theory, the majority of the American people voted that black president into office. And so that one guy with the Confederate flag, of course he's a plant. We saw that up at Occupy, the Occupy protest. They had a guy up there with bring back communism, down with capitalism, and of course the media focused on him to say, oh, those Occupy protesters, they're a bunch of commies. It's called poisoning the well, and it's a very old propaganda tactic, and we know that's what they do. And so this guy with the Confederate flag, yeah, got to be a plant to give the media an easy handle to ridicule and abuse and dismiss the protest and not even address what the issue was really about. Remember yesterday I was talking about how on Sunday morning, when the veterans were marching over to the monuments, Fox News was saying the veterans are marching to commemorate the memory of their fallen comrades in World War II, trying to just completely isolate the protest from its actual intent. Then, of course, when they picked up the barricades and took them over to the White House, Fox News had to reverse itself and say, yeah, apparently these guys do have a little bit of a gripe with the administration. And so today we get, oh, they had a Confederate flag. They're a bunch of racists. You shouldn't pay attention to what they have to say. Our government is learning a lot of bad habits from Israel, which responds to every criticism in the world with, anti-Semite, you're a Jew hater. And we're going to be talking about that later on in the show here. Meanwhile, former Navy SEAL Ben Smith says the government was actually trying to provoke the veterans into doing something really violent. Remember, they had the D.C. police out there. There was some abuse. This 90-year-old veteran was abused by the police, and they were trying to provoke a reaction where they could call in the National Guard and the Army and just get something going. To say, oh, those veterans, look how evil they are and how and they're violent and you shouldn't pay attention to them. And the veterans didn't fall for it, because we have seen these stunts so many times by this government. We know that's what they do. We know this government is trying to provoke a controllable violent uprising to justify declaration of a national emergency, suspension of the Constitution, implementation of national martial law. I think that was the agenda behind Adam Kokesh's aborted armed march into D.C. on July 4th. They tried to do it again with that George Zimmerman acquittal, where the whole week before the media was saying, oh, there'll be race riots, there'll be race riots, there'll be race riots, and there were no race riots because the black community is smart enough to realize they were being set up. So they're looking to do something else. In fact, looking at this EBT snafu over the weekend, and what an extremely angry reaction that caused opens up the possibility the government can get all the riots it wants just by shutting down food stamps across the country. Within 2 days, there'll be riots everywhere, but that may not be as controllable as the government would like to hope. Now, getting over to Obamacare, Forbes came out with a rather interesting theory. They are suggesting that the reason the Obamacare website is crashing is because very late in the development process, they made a fundamental change to the way it was going to operate. See, normally if you go to some place like eBay or any of these online stores, Amazon, whatever, what's the first thing you see? The prices for what they want to sell you. And then when you look at the prices, then you say, I want to buy, and you start filling out all the information. Well, apparently very late in the development cycle of the Obamacare website, a decision was made to force people to fill out all the information first before they're actually shown what these approved Obamacare-compliant health plans are actually going to cost. Because they knew the instant Americans saw those price tags on those policies, they were just going to cancel out of the website right then and there, because these Obamacare-compliant policies are far more expensive than what Americans have now, have far higher deductibles, because this is a cash grab. And that's all it is. This whole Obamacare thing is just a cash grab to force you to buy more expensive insurance with higher deductibles, which is going to reap trillions in profits for the health insurance providers, who will then turn around and pay billions of dollars of taxes to this desperately broke government that needs those higher tax revenues, those new tax revenues, to dangle before lenders when the debt ceiling is raised. Because raising the debt ceiling won't accomplish anything if they can't find anybody willing to buy any more Treasury bonds, and they can't go on just selling them to the Federal Reserve for instantly created money, because that puts more downward pressure on the dollar internationally at a time when countries are already saying, hey, it's time to drop the dollar. It doesn't work anymore. So this health care initiative has nothing to do with health. If this government really cared about your health, they'd be going after the toxic adjuvants in vaccines instead of indemnifying the vaccine makers. Remember, in the Homeland Security Act, there's a provision in there saying you cannot sue vaccine makers if their vaccines cause you harm. If this government really cared about your health, they would be taking SSRIs and prescription antidepressants off the market instead of blaming the guns for the violence these medications demonstrably cause. If this government cared about your health, they would be honest about the harm caused by GMO crops, or at least mandating GMO labeling so consumers can make their own choices. If this government cared about your health, they would be removing harmful additives to food like MSG and aspartame. We're going to come back here after a few words from our sponsors and continue on this topic. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. So we're talking about this thing. Is Obamacare really about the health of the American people? And the answer is no. It's a cash grab. If this government really cared about your health, I'm picking up in the middle of the list, they would be removing harmful additives to your food like monosodium glutamate and aspartame. If the government really cared about your health, they would force the users of monosodium glutamate to put that on the food label instead of allowing dozens and dozens of euphemistic and deceptive labeling, like yeast extract, so that people don't know what it is that they're eating. If this government really cared about your health, they would be doing something about the 400,000 Americans killed every year by medical mistakes. If this government really cared about your health, they would be looking for ways to lower health care costs, not increase them. All this government cares about right now is dipping into your wallet a little bit deeper by forcing you to buy more expensive whatever so that they can get new added tax revenues to lure lenders when the debt ceiling is finally raised. And it's not just Obamacare. They're coming back again with global warming. We've got to have a carbon tax. You've got to pay for carbon credits. It's just a cash grab. This government is desperate. They're hovering at the edge of collapse, and their solution always is to take more from you to prop up a Ponzi scheme central bank-based economy that is doomed to collapse anyway, no matter what they do. And you need to basically make the decision at this point. Are you going to let yourself get sucked down to ruin, into this black hole of debt which should not exist anyway and would not exist anyway? If the U.S. government had stayed with the economic model this nation was started with, instead of selling you into the slavery of privately owned central banking, not just once, but 3 times. Now, getting back to Obamacare and its website, apparently somebody has gotten hold of some of the source code, and buried within the source code for the terms and conditions page, and it's not visible when you visit the page, but written into the source code, is saying that you have no reasonable expectation of privacy. In fact, here's the direct quote coming right from the source code. You have no reasonable expectation of privacy regarding any communication or data transiting or stored on this information system. In other words, everything you type into the Obamacare system, your personal medical information, they are saying it is fair game for whatever they want to do with it. Send it over to the NSA, send it over to the FBI, send it over to law enforcement. If you get treated for a drug overdose, the police will be notified. The data can be sold to marketing companies that are going to be doing targeted marketing for pharmaceuticals and medical treatments for whatever it is that ails you. Most people are very, very private about their medical issues. They don't go out and say, oh, but I got this sexually transmitted disease when I was down at the biker bar the other day. They don't want that made public to anybody. It's another reason to absolutely oppose this system here. Now, we're seeing, this is a very alarming story coming out of Bloomberg. Actually, I apologize. We've got a caller on the line. I've kept waiting way too long. Jim in Georgia. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. You're funny as hell. My question is, okay, I've only got a 7th grade education on paper, but I'm not a stupid person. But I think a 7th grader could take the finance of this government and control it better than what they're doing. But my question, number one, was, who do we owe this money to as far as interest on the debt? What country? What do we owe to ourselves? China? Who?
No, well, part of it is owed to foreign investors like China and certainly the Middle Eastern oil nations as part of the petrodollar deal. Invest their dollars that are flowing into them for their oil in the U.S. government, in U.S. Treasury. So a big part of the debt is owed to them. But for the money that is created out of thin air by the Federal Reserve, that interest is owed to the Federal Reserve. Now, the Federal Reserve insists that they're returning most of that interest to the U.S. Treasury, but they refuse an audit. They refuse an audit.
That was my main thing. We owe the Federal Reserve then.
Yes.
Okay, that's right.
And in a way, all of that money ultimately is owed to the Federal Reserve because all of those petrodollars floating around, all of the U.S. dollars in circulation around the entire planet, all enter circulation as a loan at interest from the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve gets a piece of the action of everything going on planet Earth that goes through the U.S. dollar.
We're one of the countries in the world that only have a limitation on our spending. most countries don't, okay, as far as owing money.
Well, I mean, there's a practical limit. I mean, when you are so far in debt, you can't even make the interest payments. You know, the people who are lending you that money are just going to shut it off and start foreclosing on whatever they think they own.
Like Zimbabwe or whatever the country that you said they come out with $100 million note.
That's a $100 trillion note.
Right.
They're probably up to a $quadrillion note by now.
Okay, I've got to say this, and I'll get off the phone and let someone else on. My niece said they had gone to where the president's carving is in the Mount Rushmore, and they were in the parking lot. They couldn't get into to the mountains, but they stopped them from taking pictures in the parking lot of Mount Rushmore. Now, I find that hard to believe, but I wonder if that's true.
No, we got a confirmation. The parking lot at Mount Rushmore is completely closed off, and the police are on station there to stop people from just pulling off the side of the highway to take pictures. I mean, that's how incredibly childish this all is.
Okay, that's what I thought. I was wondering if she was telling me the truth. So, well, thank you, Michael, and bless your heart for following through with what's going on in this. And people, please, if you only got $1 to send, please send $1 because they need the backing to keep this station on the air. Thank you, Michael.
All right, and thank you for the kind word. And yes, every little tiny bit that you send in to the Republic Broadcasting Network does keep us on the air, keep us up on the satellite, keep us out there going to the affiliates. We don't get big checks with lots of zeros in them from shadowy non-governmental organizations or certain foreign governments, and we certainly don't get big advertising checks from companies like Monsanto and Dow Chemical, and for some reason those companies don't answer our phone calls when we try and sell them advertising here. Now, getting back to the story over at Bloomberg. And apparently we're seeing, as a result of the impending Obamacare, a new phenomenon in doctors' offices where when you go into a doctor's office, they are demanding that you pay your entire insurance deductible up front before the doctor will even see you. And this tells you that the entire medical health care industry in this country has been completely subverted into a for-profit operation. It's not about taking care of the sick and wounded. It's about wresting as much cash out of the population as they possibly can. And that's just absolutely absurd. And I'm not surprised to see a lot of small practice doctors are now going to go cash only. And they will be able to offer their services for much lower costs because they're not having to inflate their cost of care to compensate for the discount deals the insurance companies negotiate. But this country is really in a mess financially here. Jim Rogers is out there saying that, yes, the U.S. is exceptional. It's the largest debtor nation in the world, and he's absolutely right. And, you know, if you go all the way back to the 12 years of Reagan Bush Sr., that was the transition where the U.S. went from the world's largest creditor nation to the world's largest debtor nation and put us on the path to disaster. We'll be right back. Okay, I guess we didn't have the intro music here, so I guess we're back on the air. Now, over at whatreallyhappened.com, I reposted the link to that wonderful video excerpt from the HBO series The Newsroom. It is rightfully described as the most honest 3 minutes on television. And basically, the context of the scene is that our main character is in a college auditorium fielding questions, and the question is, what makes America the greatest nation on earth? And the other people in the panel are all saying, oh, it's freedom, it's this, it's that, and our main protagonist basically says, America isn't the greatest nation on earth, not anymore. And it's time we recognize that in order to be able to deal with it. We can't go on imagining we're the greatest nation on earth. And he goes down all the reasons why it's very obvious the United States has been driven into a decline by this predatory central banking system literally sucking the work product out of Americans to put in their own pocket. And as further evidence of that, there's a very interesting story over in The Guardian talking about median incomes around the world. And a lot of Americans still think this is the richest nation on earth, and for the money junkies it is. The money junkies are insanely wealthy, but for ordinary Americans, You may be in for a shock. You know what the country is on earth with the highest median income for all the people? It's Australia. Has the highest median wealth per adult. They're even higher than Luxembourg. The U.S. didn't even make the top 25. That is how much the American people have been looted by this predatory central bank. We used to be the richest nation on earth. We used to have the highest median wealth of any nation on earth. It's all been bled away from us by hook and by crook, mostly by crook. The rest of the world knows what's going on. Over in the Telegraph, they ran an article saying the sun is setting on dollar supremacy and with it American power. Because America's ability to project political power across the globe rests on the dollar being that international trade and reserve currency. If we're handing out the money, you do what we tell you. That's how foreign policy operates. And this article goes on saying that all of the great empires, Greece, Rome, Spain, Britain, had at their heart dominating the medium of exchange between countries. And the dollar is very clearly on the wane, and with it, U.S. power and influence over the rest of the world. And we're basically at that state of, in our history where the money junkies and the government are just grabbing everything they can as fast as they can and shoving it into their pockets before it all falls apart and they have to skedaddle for the border. And the only question facing the American people right now is, will you go on working and sacrificing to save an unsalvageable situation? Or are you going to cut your losses, stop throwing good money after bad, and hang on to as much of your personal wealth as you can? And I would suggest the latter, because by the very nature of private central banking issuing the public currencies alone at interest, it doesn't matter how hard you work, how much you sacrifice, how much you surrender to the bankers and the government, you cannot solve this problem. All pyramid systems collapse. Without exception. Nobody's ever made a pyramid scheme perpetuate. And when Treasury Secretary Lew was speaking before Congress last Thursday, his description of how the Treasury Department is handling the U.S. debt matches the description of a Ponzi scheme as defined by the Securities Exchange Commission. So there is no way to fix it. The people who set up the Federal Reserve knew it was going to crash eventually. But it was going to happen after they were dead. They were going to live their lives of extreme unearned wealth and power and luxury and go to their graves very happy, because it was going to be somebody else's problem to deal with the consequences. Now, I want to take Christine Lagarde to task here. She's out there saying the fate of the world is at stake unless Americans agree to take on more debt. So Christine Lagarde, who's the boss of the International Monetary Fund, which is just another privately owned central bank cranking the money out of thin air and loaning it at interest into circulation, is saying that unless we, the American people, agree to accept more debt, the world could be at risk. You have to accept more debt to save the world. My response to that is, Christine, I guess the world is screwed, because we, the people, refuse to go into debt anymore to private central banks that issue the public currencies alone at interest, and there are two reasons. The first and more obvious is that with the U.S. government using tax incentives to encourage offshoring of high-paying jobs, we, the people of the United States, can't afford to pay the debt we have now, let alone take on any more. That was perhaps one of the biggest mistakes, the biggest lack of the overview that we have seen in recent years. At a time when debt is being piled onto the American people, the high-paying jobs that allowed us to pay those debts were encouraged to go to other countries. And second, and most important, if not really recognized, is that scheme of private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest is indeed a Ponzi scheme that only works as long as larger and larger populations of new borrowers can be found to allow the creation of new money, part of which is siphoned off to pay the interest on the old money. When the population is maxed out, when the country is maxed out, when the planet is maxed out, the pyramid must collapse, which is what we're seeing now. So saying that Americans can save the world by agreeing to go deeper into debt slavery to the private bankers is nonsense. All that might happen by taking on more debt is a slight delay to the inevitable crash, when somebody else is head of the IMF, when somebody else is in Congress or the Oval Office. What is best for the people of the United States of America, what is best for the entire world, is to hang on to what remains of your wealth and not get sucked down into that black hole of unpayable debt caused by this practice of allowing private bankers to issue the public currencies alone at interest. What is best for Americans in the entire world is to shut down all these privately owned central banks and return to the system of economics the United States started with, which is the government creating and issuing an interest-free public currency, spending it into circulation to buy what the government needs, allowing it to flow through commerce without accruing interest, and then taxed back at the same amount at the end of the cycle to balance the books. That was the revolutionary economic system the United States started with, and the bankers have been trying to destroy it and have succeeded 100 years ago. The public currency must be restored to being a public utility rather than a for-profit scam operated by money junkies enabled by corrupted politicians. That is the only way to fix it. All of this caterwauling by Christine Lagarde that we, the American people, have to agree to service yet more debt to save the world is nonsense. The world will not be solved. Rather, the world will not be saved. The crash will be delayed. That's all. They're playing for time. There is only one solution to this problem, the one that Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy recognized was the only workable solution. Now, part of the U.S. agenda over in Afghanistan is establishing what the United States was calling the New Silk Road, which would make Afghanistan a major hub for trade across Asia and Europe, with, of course, the U.S. getting a piece of the action because they're controlling that crossroad in Afghanistan. That's another reason they're trying to keep U.S. troops in there past 2014. China has responded by starting to set up 2 alternate trading routes, infrastructures of its own that will bypass the United States and bypass the dollar. See, the New Silk Road going through Afghanistan was just another way to force the world to always go through the U.S. dollar. Oh, you're bringing in stuff from China. Well, you've got to convert your wealth to dollars. It's going over to Europe. Well, you have to convert from dollars to euros, and the U.S. gets a piece of the action. And the world is sick and tired of the U.S. getting a piece of the action of their commerce. Even if the commerce does not go through the United States of America, under Bretton Woods, the U.S. gets a piece of the action. It's like the mafia. We get a piece of the action. You don't give us a piece of the action, something bad happens to you. We send drones into your country. We invade your country and kill your leaders. Tear down your state central banks. Give you a brand new, shiny private central bank. Now, as I mentioned earlier, over the weekend there was a glitch with the electronic benefit transfer system, otherwise known as food stamps, where in many states the cards went to zero availability. In Louisiana, apparently they went the other way, completely open-ended, which the people of Louisiana took advantage of, and I don't blame them one tiny bit. Now, the warning here is that apparently the USDA, which oversees the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, has just issued an order to the agency directors calling for them to implement an emergency contingency program because of government funding issues. What they're saying is that if the debt ceiling is not raised, the food stamp money will be shut off completely across the United States of America. That'll probably trigger the very riots the U.S. government is hoping to create to declare a national emergency, enact all those FEMA laws, and suspend the Constitution and say, all right, we're in charge now. Forget about that Constitution and Bill of Rights nonsense. You do what we tell you, or we're going to drone strike you. We will be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, over in Syria, John Kerry is now calling on the international community for an urgent approval of an official date for Geneva II Conference on Syria's civil war, saying it is time to install a new transitional government in Syria. Now, remember back when the White House was saying this is not about regime change, it's just about those gosh darn chemical weapons? And Putin came in and yanked the rug out from under that excuse by setting up this deal whereby Syria is in the process of turning over and allowing to be destroyed its chemical weapons arsenal. And so you would have thought if chemical weapons were the real issue, the U.S. government would declare victory. We got the chemical weapons, and they'd back off. But no. Now they're back in there talking about a new transitional government. And Kerry's in a very awkward position because the U.S. has already set up this Syrian National Council that they were hoping was going to go on in and be a U.S.-friendly replacement for Assad. And all of those various mercenary factions have rejected the Syrian National Council, and they've formed their own alliance, which means if Assad goes, Syria will be even more rabidly anti-American and anti-Israel than it was before. So Kerry's out there saying, no, we need a transitional government. We need a government that is friendly to the U.S. We need a government we can control to go in there. And so the earlier White House claims that this was not about regime change, well, I guess they were lying to us about that as well. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu is once again out there flapping his gums about the Iranian threat. He's out there saying the world risks a historic mistake on Iran. Say, we've got to keep up the pressure for them to get rid of their entire nuclear industry because it's cutting into the profits of Israeli nuclear exports. Actually, the world is going to make a historic mistake if it goes on listening to Israel's constant lies. That's the mistake. One Israeli official came out there and said, well, if Iran isn't trying to get nuclear weapons, why are they building long-range rockets? Boy, there's a reach. Long-range rockets can carry conventional warheads that are non-nuclear, that nations are allowed to have in order to strike back at nations trying to start wars with them. And long-range rockets can be used to put things into orbit, like weather satellites or communication satellites or scientific research. Remember, in the United States manned space program, the only purpose-built space launcher was the Saturn series. All during Mercury and Gemini, the Redstone, the Atlas, the Titan were all modified nuclear delivery rockets that were used to hoist those spacecraft into orbit. So the fact that Iran is building long-range rockets is not in and of itself proof of nuclear ambitions. It's proof that Iran wants the ability to defend itself from attack. And again, remember, Iran has not launched a war of aggression in over 200 years, and certainly not since the Iranian Revolution in 1979, where they kicked out the U.S. puppet ruler, the Shah. And that stands in stark contrast with both the United States and Israel, which these days can't seem to go 6 months without bombing or drone striking or invading somebody. Now, Israel's already back there waving anti-Semitism all over the place here, and of course, every time they start cranking up anti-Semitism and Jew hate, it's basically a flashing neon sign that Israel's getting ready to do something really, really nasty, and they're seeking political cover. Now, over at Rutgers University, which has a reputation for being a bastion of liberal thought, because Paul Robeson was the first black man to be a football player at a major U.S. campus. So this is not a university with a reputation for racism. But apparently, some of the on-campus organizing groups have been putting out flyers casting, concern over Israel's continued bulldozing of Palestinian homes in the occupied territories, the illegally occupied territories. And so local Jewish activists are screaming, Rutgers has to have a bias probe. These people are obviously hating Israel, and they're obviously anti-Semitic, because everybody just knows that only Jew haters find anything wrong with Israel blowing up the homes of the Palestinians. And raising the ante on this latest campaign to scream anti-Semitism everywhere, apparently Woody Allen went public, saying that people who are criticizing Israel really are anti-Semites and Jew haters, but they disguise their hatred of the Jewish people by focusing their complaints on the government of Israel. Which is like saying people disguise their dislike of Germans by criticizing Hitler. Or to put it another way, I guess people are disguising their dislike of Jews by criticizing Woody Allen for having sex with young girls, adopted daughters. And according to Mia Farrow, even the 7-year-old, Dylan. So when we criticize Woody Allen for his personal life choices, we're not really criticizing Woody Allen. We're just expressing our hatred of the Jews. That's how desperate the spin is getting here. Pew Research just had a recent poll in which it found the majority of American Jews are very critical of Israel's government policies, as well as any moral, sane person would be. And Abe Foxman is out there screaming, well, they're anti-Semites too. Doesn't matter if they're Jewish. If you criticize Israel, you're an anti-Semite. It's a complete misuse of what the word is supposed to mean. Anti-Semitism is hating a particular race, whether it's Jewish or Arab, because of their Semitic roots, of who they are. We criticize Israel's government not because of who they are or what they believe, but because of how they behave. And like I said, this idea of shielding Israel's government from criticism by screaming anti-Semitism is like running around and saying, you're only criticizing the Nazis because you hate the German people. And it's absurd. Now, the White House is still dealing with the fallout from having blocked the World War II veterans from going into the various memorials in Washington, D.C., but allowing an exemption for an immigration rally to take place on the National Mall, where all these thousands and thousands of illegal immigrants showed up to demand amnesty and the rest. And apparently there was another march down in Georgia where they're demanding end deportations. All these illegal immigrants rallied in front of the Georgia State Capitol. Apparently this took place back on the 5th to basically demand an end to deportations. In other news, drug smugglers demand an end to jail, burglars are demanding an end to the police, and rapists demand an end to being put on the sex offender registry. Now, I know I'm going to get a lot of hate mail saying, oh, you're just anti-immigrant. No, I'm not. There is a proper immigration process, and for those people who go through that process and become U.S. citizens, welcome. I question your judgment wanting to be a citizen of this country at this particular time in our history, but welcome. Have fun. Go to Disneyland. These are illegal immigrants. They are, by definition, already criminals, and many of them come across that border from Mexico because they're fleeing prosecution for crimes committed in Mexico. Every nation on earth has the right to control who comes into their nation to be a resident there. And if you want to be fair, the United States should have an immigration policy regarding Mexico that is identical to the immigration policy Mexico has with the United States. Mexico doesn't allow people to just walk across the border and get low-paying jobs and siphon off the social support network. If you cross that border going into Mexico without being a citizen, you will get thrown in jail. And I understand why Obama is pushing this whole amnesty, whatever. He's looking to create millions and millions of instant Democratic voters. And it's bad for the economy. But we have a ruling class that is only thinking about grabbing more power, grabbing more wealth, and nobody in Washington, D.C. is really thinking about what's best for the entire country. Ron Paul being a no longer there obvious exception. Cynthia McKinney being somebody who was trying to maintain the overview. All righty, we got to take another break for Phyllis Schlafly and commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. We're going to go right to the phones here. Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Michael, how you doing? I just got back into the old pod. You know, Mike, you're right. It has nothing to do with being hateful or angry at the situation, but you put the right thing. I mean, what did Cinderella do? She didn't put one shoe on her foot. She put two beautiful shoes, right? Point is, you're exactly right. I was in Mexico a few years back, and, man, when I came out, they were searching my car like I was a terrorist, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But the bottom line is this. You go back and look at the years, and you never hear about the situation like my wife that I waited 2 years, Mike, for her to come across here the righteous way of getting married in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
But you never hear about the people that have been waiting 3-4 years to do it the right way. It's all about all these, and you're right, illegal immigrants that have come across the border And people sit there and they sit there and say, I don't care about it. Well, you know what? Look at the amount of money that you go out to Arizona. Look at the hospitals that have closed up because these guys have came across with no insurance, using different Social Security numbers, and it has nothing to do with being that you hate them, but it goes back to what you were saying. It's the law, and when the law was written, you come into this country the right way, and God bless you. Go get a job. Go bring your family the righteous way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like my wife talking about bringing her sister over from the Philippines. They're saying it would take 10 years the righteous way.
You know, I have...
Right. It has to be straightened up.
I have a couple of very good friends in the computer animation industry, and they have been working in this country, in the computer animation industry, on work visas while trying to become U.S. citizens, and it's dragged on for them years and years and years and years. And these are two people who would definitely be a benefit to the U.S. economy to have them made citizens, but it gets dragged on and dragged on and dragged on. Meanwhile, the illegals are coming up over that border from Mexico, and our government is now saying, well, we're just going to, you know, grant them amnesty, let them all be citizens. It's an insult to every American citizen who is naturalized, who came through, played by the rules, you know, and did it the right way. And it is bad for the economy. It's creating an even worse employment situation where Americans are competing with illegal aliens for those few low-paying jobs that are still out there. It's absolutely not what is good for the economy and the nation as a whole, but it's being done because they're hoping that all of these instantly amnestied illegal aliens are all going to be loyal Democratic voters.
Well, that's exactly right, Mike, and you hit the nail on the head there. All these years, and I don't know how far back have they done this, to get this electoral for the presidency in. The bottom line is when you want to come into this country, it has nothing to do with hate once again. I'm a man of love, peace, and security. But when you come across here and you come here and jump across pole vault or swim across the border, you are actually stealing into this country because you are breaking the law. And it has nothing to do with, you know, but like you were saying, Mike, earlier, man, you try to do this down in Mexico, you won't make it when they see you because they'll probably shoot you down. So thanks for taking my call, Mike, and God bless there, and keep preaching the truth, brother.
Okay, well, I'll do it just as long as I can here. Now, there's a very bizarre story that's been going on regarding this homeless man who was befriended by a programmer named Patrick McConlog, or McConlogay, I'm not sure how it's being pronounced. The homeless man goes by the name of Leo, and basically this guy, Leo, this homeless man, accepted an offer from this programmer to teach him programming. And the programmer gave him a laptop that was all set up to do code development, was teaching this guy how to be a programmer to try and get him off the streets. And it got a lot of media attention. This homeless man was scheduled to be on the Today Show, and the night before the Today Show, the police arrest him and confiscate the laptop. I mean, don't you have, like, real criminals to deal with? I mean, certainly you've got a city and state government full of absolute criminals. You've got Wall Street, where the biggest criminals of all are, but no, we're going to go arrest this homeless guy who's trying to get off the streets by learning computer programming and take away his laptop. That makes no sense at all. Now, yesterday we were talking about how over in Connecticut, this assistant district attorney had made this very bizarre statement that even if prescription antidepressants had caused Adam Lanza to go on his shooting rampage, that was not useful information for the public to have because it might encourage people to stop taking their prescription medications, and of course that's going to harm the profits of the pharmaceutical companies. And whether this district attorney was simply not doing the due diligence, because we know that it's not just one case. There are thousands and thousands of well-documented cases where these prescription antidepressants are triggering acts of extreme violence, including suicide. And maybe this assistant district attorney owns stock in the pharmaceutical companies, or maybe he got a very large campaign contribution over the weekend. But his statement that even if it was just this one case, and we know it's not the one case, this is not useful for the public to know. Let's just go on blaming the guns and gun owners for all this stuff. Well, now we're getting another bit of weirdness. As you're probably aware, the Sandy Hook Elementary School is going to be demolished and replaced. Okay? Now, for some reason, just as the public was kept at a large distance away from Sandy Hook while this whole incident was going down, they are being kept at a distance during the demolition, because there are people who like to go out and watch buildings get knocked down. And it's not a controlled demolition, it's not a high-rise, they're just going to go in there with wrecking balls and bulldozers and take it down. But for some reason, the public are being kept away from it. And here's the really bizarre part. The contractors doing the demolition are being asked to sign confidentiality agreements. Is there something going on? Are there marks on the school walls that don't jibe with the official story? Just amazing, amazing stuff here. Meanwhile, apparently, Boeing, which is reeling from the loss of airline sales because of the Dreamliner, is in hot water with the Pentagon, because apparently they have been caught overcharging on their defense contracts. It's all about the money. They've had 4 audits since 2008, and apparently they got caught charging the U.S. Army for brand new helicopter parts while actually installing used ones in the actual helicopters. Now, anybody who understands aviation understands there's a lot of stress on those parts. And if they're not brand new, if they're used, the failure rate will go up. And so some of our soldiers who are riding Boeing helicopters with those used parts where they think that they're new parts, they're going to start falling out of the sky. Another fine company wrecked by the money junkies. Just absolutely amazing here. Now let's talk about the NSA spy situation. We are hearing from Glenn Greenwald and Edward Snowden that there are more damaging revelations yet to come. Apparently Netherlands is being spied on by the U.S. government. Well, let's just back up and say U.S. government's spying on everybody, all around the globe, anywhere they can. They're spying on the American people. And by the way, they're finally admitting that in point of fact, the NSA's constant spy network has not, in fact, actually thwarted a single terror attack. And we know why they haven't. Real criminals and terrorists can evade the NSA. We proved that with our NSA challenge. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before I get back to the NSA, I want to give you an update on a story we mentioned earlier where there were rumors that the food stamp money for November was going to be cut off. And now we're getting confirmation. Fox 13 up in Utah apparently obtained a copy of the actual letter from the U.S. Department of Agriculture saying that all transfers of funding from the federal government to the state EBT systems are on hold until further notice. Meaning there is no money for food stamps for November as of right now. Now, what's going on here, of course, the reason for the government to be out there advertising, trying to get as many people on food stamps as possible, is to make them dependent on that government. So they'll do what the government wants. And what I think the Obama administration wants with this stunt is to get all the food stamp recipients in America calling their members of Congress saying, raise the debt ceiling, raise the debt ceiling, raise the debt ceiling. I think that's what they're trying to do. But there could also be a backlash. Because if November gets here and those EBT cards are empty, there will be riots across this country. And the other backlash is going to be that the American people are realizing that this government that attempts to keep us dependent on them is in fact undependable. And this is going to accelerate people saying, I want to delink from the government. I don't want to have anything to do with this government anymore. I don't want to give them my money. I don't want to give them the lives of my children. And I don't want anything back. Take your little social program, whatever, and just go away and let me live my life because I can take care of me and my family a heck of a lot better than the federal government can. And, of course, behind all of this stuff is this nonsense. If this government simply cut off all the spending for these wars of conquest and all these trillion-dollar bailouts to Wall Street, the taxes paid by the American people could fund all the schools and all the food programs and all of this stuff to take care of the American people. These programs, food stamps, national monuments, national parks, are being targeted to punish the American people for standing up and saying we will not agree to endure more debt to this private central bank. So they're really upping the stakes here, and apparently, according to Fox 13 over in Utah, it's now official. The federal government has cut off the food stamp money for the month of November. They're trying to panic the food stamp recipients into screaming at Congress, raise the debt ceiling, we don't care what you have to do. Take money away from somebody else, which is actually a good idea. I'm in favor of taking money away from these boondoggle weapons programs like the F-35 and the F-22 and this USS San Antonio and use it to care for the American people, because that is what the Americans pay taxes for. The only legitimate function of government is to do for the community what the community needs and cannot organize for themselves. All this other stuff, money to Israel, money to Wall Street, money for weapons development, for wars of conquest, that is not a legitimate use of America's taxpayer funds. This government has no business sending a single penny of taxpayer money to Israel while Americans are sleeping in alleys and eating out of trash dumpsters. It is an affront and an insult to every single American to see this government completely blind to the suffering of the American people as they pour trillions of dollars all over Israel. You, the American people, have been forced to give to Israel 60 times the entire cost of the Apollo moon program. And we're not going to get a giant leap for mankind out of all that money, or even a technological fallout to spark a new industrial boom. So this government's just going to go on punishing the American people until they get what they want, or until the American people stand up and say, all right, that's it. That's it. That's the straw that broke the camel's back here. Now, getting back to the NSA, the Electronic Privacy Information Center, which is a privacy-oriented nonprofit that's been around for a lot of years, they do a lot of really good work, they are going directly to the United States Supreme Court to ask that the NSA spying on American citizens be shut down, and their argument is the same one I've been making for months. The Foreign Intelligence Service Court, or rather, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, does not have jurisdiction inside the United States. That's why the word foreign is in there. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which created the court, specifically says outside the United States of America. The FISA court cannot write laws or create laws or authorize spying on American citizens inside the United States of America. They don't have jurisdiction. And Epic is taking this case right to the Supreme Court, and hardly surprising. Solicitor General Donald Verrilli, who represents the Obama administration in the Supreme Court, is asking the Supreme Court not to take the case. Because he knows, and we know, if the Supreme Court actually ruled on this, they're going to say, yeah, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act only is binding and has authority outside the United States of America. And as I mentioned before, I mean, the NSA is now having to admit that, yeah, they were sort of lying about all the terror attacks they thwarted with the spying. They didn't really do any. Not even one. Because they're spying on us. They're not looking for real criminals or terrorists, or they'd have their hands full up at Wall Street. But we proved with our 3 NSA challenges here at WhatReallyHappened.com, real criminals and real terrorists are going to be able to create their own systems of encryption that will defeat the NSA for as long as it takes for them to complete their plans. That's just the reality. The NSA is able to read all your traffic because all the publicly standard methods of encryption are known to the NSA, so they can just brute force the keys, or these systems are simply backdoored. And that is the secret of the NSA's ability to read all traffic, is they've got built-in backdoors and holes into all of this stuff, which are now being found by cyber criminals and exploited. The NSA is not making you any safer. In fact, they've increased the risk that you will fall victim to identity thieves, or cyber blackmail, or any of these other malware running around, because they're all taking advantage of all the little holes that were left in the systems. We were talking about yesterday the latest generation of D-Link routers have been found to have a wide open backdoor that allows anybody to come in from the outside and basically take over control of your entire local area network. I don't think it was an accident. I think it's another one of these NSA backdoors that are everywhere. The NSA cannot really find real criminals and real terrorists who develop their own methods of encryption. The NSA is spying on you, it's spying on the French, it's spying on the British, it's spying on the Dutch, it's spying on everybody to steal business secrets, to keep an eye on you, to get the message out, we're watching everything that you do, so don't you dare criticize the government and think about replacing it. Now, attention is being called to the fact that there were federal grants being sent out to local jurisdictions ostensibly to fight terror. And it turns out the money is being used to basically increase surveillance on the law-abiding citizens. This government clearly views the American people as the enemy. And they're putting up all these systems not to look out for acts of terror, but to just spy on people. Over in Great Britain, apparently they've got a new system they're just putting in there now where the street lights all have built-in microphones that are being monitored by computer systems that will instantly identify not only gunshots, but angry voices and automatically direct the surveillance cameras to look at what's going on. This has nothing to do with fighting crime. It has everything to do with keeping the lid on the slaves, keep the slaves in place, keep them serving those private central bankers. Going to take a break for some commercials. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the NSA. And not too long ago, Edward Snowden basically released the information that the NSA is trying to build a 6 degrees of separation database on every single American. It's a gargantuan amount of data. And again, just like data mining Facebook and social media for raw intelligence, it's fraught with problems because I don't know very much about my friends' friends' friends. And yet the NSA is trying to build this grid, which I guess its only real value is to build a case against somebody that needs to be persecuted by saying, we think you're a terrorist suspect because your co-worker's wife's hairdresser's lawyer's chiropodist's sister once spoke to a suspected terrorist someplace out there. Other than that, there's not much point to a 6 degrees of separation database, but that's what they're doing. Now comes word that the NSA is, in fact, able to harvest your contacts list off your computers and personal electronic devices. Not just your emails and who you're phoning and texting to. They're literally going into your Outlook and just harvesting your entire contacts list. Good luck with that one. I have people in my contacts list I haven't talked to in 15 years. Especially all the contacts I had in the film and television industry. I don't call them anymore, with a few exceptions that I maintain friendly contact with. But they're just grabbing it all. And all of it is a violation of the Fourth Amendment right to privacy. The government is not allowed to come into your private life until they have suspicion of a crime backed by oath or affirmation supported by a warrant signed by a judge. Going to take a phone call here. Chris in Las Vegas. Aloha, Chris. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Michael, I was going to take a little bit of an opposing viewpoint to your premise that if we were dealing in common sense and common speak, would have validness to it. But in truth, unfortunately, with these twisted legal mercenaries who presume themselves to be God-men, who twist the words they commonly use into words of legal sleaze, the states are considered to be foreign from Corp U.S. in actuality. And so, under their premise of 10 Mile Square, which is Washington, the District of Criminals, which is a private, foreign-owned corporation area similar to Benghazi or some other diplomatic immunity area, they consider the states to be foreign, and therefore except for the foreign territories that lie within the states that belong to the federal government, we are all considered to be foreign too, and that's the premise they use to step in and step out of when they want to consider the states to be foreign so they can apply their NSA intel gathering schemes amongst the foreign states and claim it's foreign surveillance intelligence courts.
Well, if that was a valid and binding legal argument, then we wouldn't have Obama's Solicitor General telling the Supreme Court not to take the case. Because the bottom line is that Constitution and the Bill of Rights are the law of the land. They belong to we the people. We the people decide what it all means. We have not ceded our authority or ceded our mental faculties to the government to decide for us what it means. We decide what that means, and that Fourth Amendment is still binding. This idea that Washington, D.C. sees the 50 states as foreign entities, you know, I'm actually kind of okay with that. Let's put up a wall around Washington, D.C. and stop letting Washington, D.C. collect taxes from foreign entities.
Well, they actually do have a wall. There's standing stones that tell you that the outside is without and the inside is within foreign sovereign territory.
Well, let's fill in the holes. Let's dome the whole thing over.
I'm with that. You know, this would be a wonderful, wonderful plan. I wish it weren't so, but unfortunately, we've all been duped to believe that the people within that district of criminals represent us when they actually represent foreign interests opposed to America.
No, well, we understand that, but getting back to your main premise, this idea that the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court has jurisdiction over the 50 states because the 50 states are considered foreign territory, that I don't think is going to fly with the American people, and that's why Obama's Solicitor General is up there trying to get the Supreme Court not to hear the case at all. If they thought the American people would go along with that rationalization for allowing spying on us, because the Bill of Rights does not apply just to Washington, D.C., it applies to the 50 states and all of the people.
I certainly agree with you, but remember, Obama's the one that presumed that the territories were part of the United States, the foreign territories, including Puerto Rico and Guam and Kwajalein and all these other different entities that fall under the foreign jurisdiction as part of Corp US's assets without the different parts of the planet where they actually have federal jurisdiction that applies within those territorial zones. But this is kind of international law world, and most people are not educated in this aspect of how the government looks at things. I regret that if it is so, and I don't support it any more than you do, or most of the American people, that this is in fact how these demoniacs that practice law as godmen, attorneys that twist the law into a new form of legalese, actually presume it to be, assume it, and deem it to be, so that makes it so in their mind.
Well, you know, everybody suffers from delusions, especially when you're consuming as much alcohol as they do in Washington, D.C. But again, you know, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights belongs to we the people. It says so right at the very top, and it is up to we the people to decide what it means and whether this government we allow to manage the nation is complying with the rules or not. And I don't care how many lawyers they line up for how many hundreds of thousands of dollars per hour billing time to tell me that up is down and black is white and you know, left is right and the rest of it. I don't care how they twist it around. All of this stuff they're doing is unconstitutional, and that Constitution is the law of the entire land, all 50 states, not just the District of Columbia.
Well, if you would recall, the 1871 D.C. Incorporations Act is when they overlaid the Constitution with the corporate seats that they sit in these days, as opposed to the de jure lawful seats of the 1789 Constitution, whenever the people actually did have some say in the government through their qualified electors.
Well, I don't care if they incorporate the city of Washington, D.C. That doesn't supersede the Constitution. The only way to supersede and change the Constitution is with a constitutional amendment. And so this is an absolute null argument. Anyway, listen, I got to let you go here. I need to get a couple more stories because we've got Jim Trafficant coming on at the top of the hour, and I want to get it. Okay, so Chris, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. And I'm sure that there'll be no end of carpetbaggers running around saying, oh, no, this is all really legal because of this little justification. No. The Constitution is the supreme law of this land. It is the original contract with America. It is the rules under which we, the people, allow the government to be the caretaker of our nation for the benefit of the nation and its people. And if this government isn't playing by the rules, they're not a legitimate government, no matter how many circuitous legal rationalizations they may come up with. There's a new malware running around called CryptoLocker, and apparently it is spreading through botnets, which makes it very hard to defend against. And apparently if this system gets onto your computer, it locks it up, and you have to send a ransom to some payment processing site in another country that's free from extradition or investigation treaties to get your machine back. And it's another reminder, we have all been made more vulnerable to these kind of crimes by all the NSA backdoors in our systems, because the cyber criminals are finding these things, and they're discovering them, and they're using them. The NSA did not make the American people safer with all this spying. They have made us more vulnerable and open to these kind of computer criminals. All right, real quick, I want to get some stuff here about global warming, because they're already back to saying, oh, we need a carbon tax, and it's another cash grab, just like Obamacare. Now, recently, in response to the fact that despite prognostications that snow would be a thing of the past 10 years ago by the carbon Nazis, we've had several record-setting winters in a row. We're going into another one right now with that major snowstorm that just devastated South Dakota. And the carbon Nazis have been out there saying, oh, no, the world is getting warmer, but the heat is hiding in the ocean. I'm not kidding you. That's what they were actually saying. You know, that the oceans are hiding the global warming down there in the deep. And that's nonsense, because anybody who understands physics understands that warm water will rise to the surface and the cold water will sink. But that sounded really good in the corporate media to explain why we're getting these hard winters, even as the carbon Nazis say, oh, there's still global warming, it's all the fault of people, you got to pay carbon taxes. However, a recently peer-reviewed paper published in Nature Climate Change has found that ocean warming has slowed over the past 50 years. So that carbon Nazi dodge is now out of the window. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And there's one good thing about the government shutdown, and that is a lack of government propaganda being handed out to the corporate media, which I guess is bad for the media, because they're scrambling to find stories to fill up the airwaves here. Fox News is now going on about a new tell-all book by Johnny Carson's former attorney, showing the comedian's darker side and how he wasn't always pleasant. Man, that's grasping at straws here. Little side note, my lady love, Claire, actually was on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. She wrote some arrangement charts and put together background singers for Charo on one of the episodes, which I still can't find a tape of, unfortunately. But getting back to this whole thing about global warming and the realization that ocean warming has decelerated 50% over the past 50 years. It's slowing down. And it sort of puts the lie to the carbon Nazis' claim that the world is getting warmer, but the heat is hiding places. Now, heat doesn't hide. Heat energy flows from the hotter to the colder. That's how your stovetop works. And again, simple little snap question here. How many active volcanoes and thermal vents are there on the floor of the world's oceans? And don't be embarrassed if you don't know the answer. It's a trick question. Nobody knows. Nobody knows how many active volcanoes and thermal vents are on the floor of the world's oceans, pumping out intense heat into the water. And if that heat cannot be accounted for in ocean temperature analysis, then any claims to have determined human contribution to ocean warming are just wild-ass guesses. Oh, my goodness. All righty. Let's see. We were talking about, here's an interesting story. After years of suppression, scientists finally admit that copper destroys the norovirus. So does silver. Now, the Romans believed wearing copper jewelry would prevent many diseases. And starting in the Middle Ages, it was noticed that the nobility who were using silverware and silver goblets somehow escaped the ravages of the Great Plagues. Now, of course, you can go down to your health food store and get copper bracelets and colloidal silver, and of course the American pharmaceutical industry is saying, oh, no, you don't want to do that. We have a drug for you. And the whole point of this article is that if hospitals started using copper surfaces, that they could absolutely reduce norovirus exposure and cut down on how many people get sick. But it's not going to happen, because in this country, disease is a profit opportunity. And this industry does not survive unless the population is constantly ill. Ill from food additives, ill from GMOs, ill from the vaccines and their toxic adjuvants. You're not going to have a healthy society when disease is so enriching to the medical industrial complex, as it were. Okay, so let's see. Another article about promoting diseases that don't exist, and this follows hard on the heel of the revelation by the guy who came up with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder shortly before he passed away. He basically came out and said, it's not a real illness. We made it up so we could sell pills. Now, when I was a kid in school, we didn't call it attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We called it teachers boring me, because teachers spending all of our time with the dullards, and we smarter kids, our attention wanders. We look out the window. But these days, everything, every normal human behavior is now declared a disease for which there is a pill they're going to sell you. And one of the most alarming aspects of the Obamacare legislation is that provision which gives the government priority over the parents in determining the correct, meaning most profitable, medical treatment of the children. Remember what George Carlin used to say, you know, you don't have rights, you have owners. They own you. And that's exactly the way they're treating you right now. So they're coming up with vaccines for illnesses you're never going to get. I think one of the worst, of course, is that cervical cancer vaccine. Now they want to give it to boys. And this thing is causing real harm to the girls that have been injected with this medication, even though they've got a less than 0.1% chance of ever encountering this disease in life. But it's big bucks, $300 shot, and the doctor gets half of that. It's all driven by profit. Article over at the Daily Mail, how doctors are turning us into a nation of pill poppers. Mental health experts warn GPs are too quick to prescribe drugs. They know it's a problem. They know it's a problem. All righty, let's see. Coming on down here, I'm skipping over some of my talking points here. I think we talked about this the other day, but I'm going to mention it anyway. There's a new peer-reviewed study that shows that the Ashkenazi, which is the largest group of Jews in the world, again, this is hardly the first time this has been documented, they are not descendants of the biblical Israelites. And this is not really a surprise. I mean, just looking at their skin tone, they're obviously Central Asian and not Middle Eastern. And this study involved mitochondrial DNA and found that the Ashkenazi Jews are 80% European ancestry, and only a tiny percentage coming from the Middle East. Now, there's a book out, The 13th Tribe, that documents the Ashkenazis arose in Khazaria, in Central Asia, in the area north of the Caucasus Mountains. In about 800 AD, the government of Khazaria, the king, wanted to trade with the Christians to the north and the Muslims to the south, but did not want to be converted and absorbed by either one. So he declared Judaism to be the official religion of Khazaria. They imported some rabbis and taught everybody, you are now all Jewish, this is your history, and so forth and so on. And the scam worked for about 100 years, and then Khazaria fell. And the descendants of those converted Jews migrated north into Russia and westward into Europe. That's where the European and Russian Jews come from. They are not, in fact, direct lineal descendants of the biblical Hebrews. Now, this, of course, is an area of major contention because the government of Israel bases most of their foreign policy on being the inheritors of biblical Israel. Certainly, in terms of their propaganda to the Christian Zionists in this country, that's the big selling point. We are the modern-day versions of the Jews you read about in the Bible, and they're not. And so they're always screaming about that and trying to come up with other claims saying, oh, no, the science is flawed, it's not real, and so forth. Here's a very alarming story we're going to finish up this segment with. And this is a story coming out of Mercola's website, Dr. Mercola's website. Apparently, genetically modified human babies are a reality. And apparently there was a study on 30 genetically created humans that was published in 2001 and has not made any news coverage until just about now. Now, these children were created using genes from 2 different women and 1 man. And it opens the door to the idea that we're now going to have designer babies. And the really scary part here is we've been talking about that epicite gene, this genetically engineered corn that when consumed by humans tricks their body into treating human sperm as an infection and launches antibodies to destroy it, which basically means anybody eating this corn, male or female, becomes unable to reproduce. But not to worry, Monsanto is coming out with their Roundup Ready baby. We've seen how wonderful those crops are. Genetic engineering is the most dangerous technology humans have ever tinkered with. They're playing with the code of life, and they're handling it in a very reckless and cavalier fashion. And the possibility of an extinction-level event coming from an accident, from the way this is being mishandled, cannot be ignored. Meanwhile, an interesting story came out. Why can't churches consign Monsanto to the dark places from the pulpit? Because if supposedly God created all of nature and Monsanto is tinkering with nature, are they not in fact engaging in some kind of sin? And of course, we don't see any criticism coming from churches about this. We'll be right back after Phyllis Schlafly and commercials with Jim Traficant. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3, and joining us on the phone is former Representative Jim Traficant. And Jim, I can't tell you what a treat it is to finally talk to you after all these years of admiring what you were doing, what you were trying to do. For our listeners who are not as familiar with his career, former sheriff, 9-term member of the House of Representatives, one of the very few voices standing up early on and saying the nation was headed in the wrong direction economically, and apparently the House of Representatives took umbrage with his heresy and basically maneuvered him out of the House of Representatives in 2002. 2002. And Jim, just real quick, before we get into what your prognostications about the economy, exactly how was it that the House of Representatives managed to eject you?
Well, number one, I was indicted and convicted of taking bribes by the Justice Department, but I made the House expel me because of the fact that most unusual trial now it's going to end up being probably a very significant case because they really did set me up with no evidence at all. I'm the only American ever convicted without one shred of physical evidence, and now 6 of the 9 people that testified admitted that they had lied, and there's all kind of revelations coming out. It's really a fiasco, but my problem started when I brought home John Deminick, the man who was convicted of being the infamous Ivan the Terrible of Treblinka, and I'm the congressman that proved that he was innocent and brought him back from Israel. And I really offended the power structure of this country, the Justice Department, and I was the number 1 target of American-Israel Public Affairs Committee, and that was the bottom line. And they couldn't beat me with a gun, so they had to get me out, and they got me out. And that's the bottom line, Michael.
Well, I think the good news for you right now here is that because Americans know they were lied to about Saddam's nuclear weapons and lied to about a bunch of things, I don't need to go down the list, Americans are now ready to listen and hear and accept that you were, in fact, the victim of a setup. Looking at the government from our sadder and wiser eyes, we recognize this is actually a very common practice of destroying political opponents. The situation with Demjanjuk was that Israel just has been trying to maintain this infallibility that when they say somebody's a Nazi war criminal, they are, and it was a huge embarrassment to them. Of course, they immediately turned around and tried him again on some other concocted charges. But I think the reason why so many people admire you, along with myself, was that early on you were standing up in the House of Representatives and trying to warn the nation that its economic policies were inevitably heading to a major, major problem. And you made some very amazing speeches in the House of Representatives that basically amounted to heresy against the Federal Reserve System. What was it you were predicting way back when?
Well, number one, I was the beginning. I was the genesis of the Fed attack. My speech of 1993, now being printed in books all over the world, basically brought the truth out about the Fed and recommended that the Fed be abolished. And, you know, this auditing the Fed, this is the funniest thing I ever heard about, because you can audit it all you want. When it's done, it's going to show them to be a responsible, reliable group. I mean, they've got to go. Congress has got to handle the money. They've got to print the money. They've got to control the money. And the great danger that I had foreseen was a statement that was made by Charles de Gaulle that I could see becoming manifest in some of the international policies. De Gaulle says, you'll never defeat America with a missile, but you destroy America through the dollar. And they're very, very close to doing that. China has been conducting secret meetings with Japan, Russia, France, relative to replacing the dollar for the purchase of oil, for example, just for oil at the beginning. Well, that's just the onslaught that ultimately China wants to remove the dollar, and they will step in with the great and tremendous debt that we're accumulating. But, you know, everybody's talking about these budget deficits, Michael, but no one's talking about the fact that part of the contributing factors to these budget deficits is, no question, spending. Second of all, an income tax, where we have half of the country has become dependent, and they're dependent upon the federal government, and they're in fact ingrates, and you're not going to change the policies. It's crazy. But other than that, no one talks about the trade deficit. That trade deficit is getting close to $750 billion, if they tell you the truth, per year. And China is investing and making investments and buying nuclear attack submarines and attack aircraft and missiles with our money. They're taking about $300 billion a year in trade surpluses out of America. And it's like anything else, and I've said it all along, how can you stay in business if you buy more than you sell? And I said our federal government is no different. And we've had some foolish trade policies. We are the flea market of the world, and we've never even charged for table space. And I think these free traders and all of these individuals that continue to espouse a progressive communist income tax have destroyed our country. And I'm not quite so sure now it can even recover. I believe, and I've made this statement now, and I think Pat Buchanan has as well. I predicted by the year 2040 that America will, in fact, break up very similar to the Soviet Union. And everybody sort of laughed about that when I made that statement in Congress. But let me just take this 1 second to make this point, Michael. We woke up one day and we heard on the news that there was no more Soviet Union. There was no CIA warning. There were no student protests. There were no guns fired. All of a sudden we woke up one morning and the morning news said the Soviet Union is no more. Now they're a confederation of independent states. And that's what's going to happen in this country, because people in certain states are going to be tired of sending their money to Washington and seeing that money being redistributed to Cleveland and Chicago and New York and Detroit, and seeing their money being used by a growing dependent mass of people in the United States who many are not going to work, don't want to work. And we've got a hell of a problem on our hands, and everybody's afraid to say it, because if you say it, you're going to carry the baggage of being a racist or a bigot. And I think that there's no citizen that really wants to become dependent, but we have a new dependent slave system in America, and people willfully are accepting it. And I'm not so sure this thing can resolve itself. It's certainly not. The way things are constructed and the situation, I don't see it happening, Michael.
Well, I tend to agree with you on all those points. I really do think that the current United States is probably going to collapse the way the former Soviet Union did. And like that event, it's probably going to happen with very, very little warning. I'm certainly in agreement with this whole idea of the Federal Reserve being part and parcel to a lot of our economic problems, because basically this idea of having a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan and interest is exactly the type of banking the American people fought a revolution to be free of. And we started this country with this wonderful idea of the public currency as a public utility, only to be sold back into this private central banking scam not once but 3 times. And right now, were we to look for a way to salvage the current situation, we need a leader with the courage of an Andrew Jackson or an Abraham Lincoln or a John F. Kennedy who recognized what the real problem was and tried to correct it. Of course, we understand they were treated very rudely, just as you were, for daring to speak out on this issue. We're coming up on a commercial break here. We're going to have to take a break for about 3 minutes of commercials. Jim, I hope you're going to stay with us. I'm going to keep you as long as I can this hour, if that's okay with you.
I'll hold on with you, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with former Representative Jim Traficant, one of the few truth tellers out of the House of Representatives, after these words from our sponsors. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with former Representative James Traficant, who was sounding a warning about the financial darkness descending on us way back in 1991. Actually, even before that, he was making some comments about that, and pretty much everything that you were warning America about in your speech about the bankruptcy of the United States is now obvious for everybody to see. I think we all pretty much agree that this model of a private central bank issuing all of the public currency as a loan at interest is a system which by design piles up the debt faster than it piles up the available money with which to pay that debt, which is why sooner or later it reaches a point of collapse, which is where we are right now, where Christine Lagarde is out there saying that unless Americans agree to incur more debt for future generations, that the world will collapse. But I think part of the problem, you're talking about our trade deficit, we have allowed our manufacturing to simply dissolve. It's been happening for 30 years. We've got government tax policies that incentivize offshoring of manufacturing jobs. And I think what it really comes down to is Wall Street and our financial institutions got very lazy because of the Bretton Woods deal at the end of World War II, where all international trade and banking goes through the dollar and all dollars enter circulation as a loan at interest. Wall Street was just getting a piece of the action of global commerce, and they figured, we don't need to dirty our hands with that manufacturing and agricultural stuff, which is why we are in this trade deficit. And it is absolutely crippling. And we look at these other nations like China and Russia, which have huge trade surpluses because they're manufacturing nations. They're producing products. You can't really run an economy without having a product to sell. And it just seems like the American economy has survived for too long on basically gaming the system to acquire wealth off of other people's goods and services and commerce. And now they're really stuck in a very difficult place, and I'm in agreement with you. I don't think this system can be saved, which is why we're at this point of desperation where the government is just engaging in these cash grabs from the American people like Obamacare and carbon taxes, and it does seem like we're in the final stages of what's probably going to be the ultimate collapse.
Well, you cannot manage. We're a managed debt economy nation. If you were to describe the United States of America, we are in fact now a managed debt economy nation. And if you look at the trade deficit, there's another factor there too, Michael. Just take a look. If you step across the border in Mexico, there's no more Social Security, no more pensions, no more health care. There's no more hourly wage, no more unions, no more any type of regulation, no more EPA, no more securities, et cetera, et cetera. You come to the United States and look at the heavy burden that a manufacturer has. The bottom line, manufacturers in America couldn't make a profit here. Their competition moved, and there was flooding with this free trade business, flooding products back into America at much below their production costs. They're forcing them to leave. And as a result, we've had that drain now from foolish trade policies. I think you have to factor in a fair trade system, and that which would take in all variables relative to the production of a given product. We haven't done that. We've had this idealistic yellow brick road. But more importantly, and I think the killer has been this communist income tax. Now, when I say that, people say, Jim, why do you keep saying that? Number one, the progressive income tax was the predicate block of the communist program established by Karl Marx. The foundation of Karl Marx's economic policy was a progressive income tax of a communist plan. And that's what we have here, Michael. Think about it. If you work hard, you get hit in the head. If you don't work, the government sends you a check. It's out of hand. I recommended, and one of my last bills, and I firmly believe I ought to end up passing this bill, was to abolish the IRS, repeal the 16th Amendment, that I don't think is legal anyway, but kill it for good.
It wasn't even ratified.
Yeah, put a nail in the coffin anyway. And come with a consumption tax. Everybody pays. No exemption, even a welfare mother. And those drug dealers on the streets would pay the tax. Those visitors from Japan and Germany go to Broadway and Las Vegas, they would pay into our tax. Everybody would pay the tax, and we would have and ultimately reach a balanced budget. Now, everybody said, well, Jim, your tax was too high. It was 25%. But I want you to think about this. Harvard did a study and said 25% of the cost of all our manufacturing products is complying with the tax code. They said if you went with a consumption tax, the prices that we are paying now, Michael, will probably not change hardly at all because of the reduction in the cost expenditure for production by these manufacturers. They'd start looking downward and pricing their product for market share the old-fashioned way, not looking for tax breaks. But I want you to think about this. There'd be no more withholding. What is withholding? The government withholds a large part of your check, and they decide how to spend it, and look how they've spent it. Under this program, there would be no more withholding. You'd get the entire check. There's no more forms, no more nothing, no more Social Security tax, no more Medicare trust tax, no more tax on savings, no more tax on investment, no more tax on inheritance, no more corporation tax, no more capital gains tax. They say, Jim, what do you mean no more corporation tax? Michael, corporations simply put the tax on that they're taxed into the charge to the consumer. Look, if you take this program and you'd have no capital gains tax, no corporation tax, you'd have these companies that have fled America coming back home, first of all, number one, because it's not the labor wages they're concerned with, it's these other predatory, overregulated aspects that have killed the economy in America. They'd not only move back, you would see a revitalization where entrepreneurs who can earn money and save that money will invest that money. And the government isn't the one to create the jobs, and that's all we have going on here, Michael. It's the private sector. And why should anybody venture and risk in this private sector with this predatory tax scheme that we have? It's time to make that change. If they do not make this change, America will collapse into about 5 or 6 different independent states. When you see that political landscape red and blue, just forget the politics and start looking at the economy. And what you're saying here is you're saying there are these red states that are getting tired of the policies in the blue states, or vice versa. But now, a good example, and no one's really taking it yet. No one's really looking at the microcosm within, with now the biggest city in the United States going bankrupt, Detroit. You have 1.85 million people in the city of Detroit. Now it's down to 700,000. Have you seen any real demographic profiles on the 700,000 who've remained? I wonder how many pay taxes, Michael.
Probably very, very few.
Probably very few. And most of them are consumers of it. And people are getting tired. They're tired of living in unsafe communities with governments that are reckless, with policies that have basically favored the street people. I mean, it's like it's a hip thing to do. It's a cool thing to do to be with the downtrodden. Look, a lot of the downtrodden, you had to get a job. Now, my family, I come from a very, very poor home, no question. My dad was a truck driver. But my dad always told me one thing. He said, Jimbo, he said, I never worked for a poor guy. If someone doesn't make an investment, Michael, nobody works.
Okay,
we have
Jim,
to incentivize.
we
have to reward
Okay, Jim, I'm sorry to cut you off here. We have to take another break for commercials. We're going to bring you back after these words from our sponsors, and I'd like you to pick up where you left off. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're speaking with former Representative James Traficant. And, James, before I let you go back to what you're commenting on, a couple of things I want to touch on. First of all, we got an email from a listener asking if you're considering running for the White House in 2016, possibly with Cynthia McKinney as a running mate.
Yeah, I'm probably more apt to run for city limits. I have more big opponents than anybody. I was the number one target of Israel in the early 90s. In the world. In the world, Michael.
I'm not surprised.
Target of Israel.
I was on the list, but considerably below where you were as well here. The other thing, before I let you continue, is I do have to take issue with simply lumping all of the people who are currently in positions of dependency in our economy as just somehow deserving of being there, because my wife and I volunteer for and support 2 food distribution programs here on Oahu.
I agree with you, Michael. I didn't take the time to delineate very carefully. There's a lot of people in there that, for no problem and no fault of their own, are there, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because you get on the shows and you touch on issues fast, and sometimes you don't spend enough time on those areas. But, you know, one thing before I go on, what I wanted to talk about, I want to mention that I wrote in an article that I write for American Free Press about 18 months ago about the 53-47%. 53% taxpayers, income taxpayers, 47% do not pay. And I put it in, and I believe that that's where Romney got his figures from. And I was very shocked that when Romney used that, and it came to become an issue, that his advisors did not have him prepared to handle that question. I believe that was the issue that caused Romney to be defeated. I believe after the first debate, Romney was clearly ahead.
Mm-hmm.
That second debate, when President Obama hit him with the 53-47%, Romney looked like he was apologizing for his wealth, like he was defending a mistake that he made. And I, for the life of me, don't understand it, Michael, because you see in these presidential debates, each side has a group of advisors that sit in the table and coach these guys for about a week. And they even have someone that plays the part of their opponent, for example.
Yes.
And they run these mock debates. I'm surprised they didn't have him prepared for that. If Mitt Romney would have said this, Michael, Mr. President, are you accusing me of violating the tax laws? Are you accusing me, Mr. President? It's my turn, let me speak. You see, Mr. President, I've availed myself, as any good businessman should, of the American tax laws. And those tax laws were created by you Democrats. Now, Michael, I'm a Democrat, been a Democrat all my life, but I said this on the House floor. The Democrats controlled Congress for 50 years, and they gave every one of these tax breaks to their rich friends. And on election day, they'd come out before the election and say how the rich avoid paying taxes. But after the election is over, they go in the back room and make the deals and give the perks and give the tax break for their rich friends. And I think if he'd have been prepared to handle that, Mitt Romney would have been your president today. He wasn't, and it showed me something about him. I don't think he was on his feet as solid as he should be. But of those 47%, there are a hell of a lot of good people down there, and with no problem of their own, there's some legitimacy there. But, Michael, you and I can also agree that there is a tremendous number of people in America who do not want to work. They play the system, and in fact, they get that government subsidy, and they do work under the table for cash. This is why I believe if we go to a consumption tax, everybody would pay. But there's one other thing, Michael, that nobody has really addressed, that I've tried to address in our tax scheme. And that's America needs a border-adjusted tax that is not protectionist. Now, I want you to imagine this. The Chevrolet Cruze is made up in my area, the automobile. 25% of the cost of building that car is to comply with our tax code. If the tax code is thrown out, that $20,000 Cruze is now $15,000. In other words, they're selling it for $20 now. with that $5,000 load. You take that $5,000 load out, next thing you know, they're going to come in at $17,000. They're going to be worried about Ford. Ford will come in at $16,500. Chrysler might come in at $15,900, and you're going to see a diminution of, in fact, cost in this country. But one other thing, with that consumption tax and throw out that tax code, now you take $5,000 cost off that car. Now it's shipped overseas without a load. Right now it's carrying a $5,000 load and it's being taxed overseas, and they're not selling them. Now, for the first time in history, that car is not sold in America, so it don't carry any tax. It goes overseas, scot-free from America. It's very competitive. Those cars coming from overseas, sold in America, the same 25% cost as ours. Now, our prices are going to go down because of the diminution, but they didn't have that tax coming in. Now they're going to have that tax. Their prices and their costs are going to change. And you will see these foreign manufacturers moving to America, moving and producing tremendously in America, which is the big flea market. But no one's looking at the macroeconomic picture of the tie-in and the synergy between that trade and that budget deficit. And unless that happens, Michael, it's going to blow up. There's no question it's going to blow up.
Well, I actually like that idea of yours, and I do favor a consumption tax over our current income tax, which is deeply flawed. The sheer volume of the tax code simply represents the accumulation of all the special favors being given out there. And we do need to incentivize industry and productivity, and we need to stop incentivizing dependence. Because we understand the federal government wants the American people dependent on it. That's why they're advertising for food stamps, because if you're dependent on the government for your food, you'll basically sit quietly and not challenge what the government is doing. And independence means not only political independence, but financial independence as well. So it is pretty much messed up, and I am in agreement with you. I think we're past the point where the situation could be turned around. We know that Congress could, with a single vote, rescind the charter on the Federal Reserve and shut it down, but they won't because they're too deep in the pockets of Wall Street. So we're just going to have to ride out the coming crash and just make sure that we, the people, know what kind of a nation and economy and government we want in this land when we restart it back up. And I agree with you that the collapse of the Soviet Union and the rise of the Russian republics is probably a very good forecast of what we're going to see happen here.
Well, keep in mind one thing about the income tax. It rewards dependency. It subsidizes illegitimacy. It kills investment. It chases jobs out of America. Why are we nuts or what? Now, the thing that bothers me, Michael, and this is for people like you, and I've heard about your show. In fact, people from this area recommend that I be on your show. And I want to commend you for that. And I know it's tough making a living out there without big backers with the right group behind you. You have to be good, and evidently you are, and I appreciate what you do. I do want to say this to you. There's too many groups that are saying, we don't need any tax trafficking. Don't buy into that. We have a great society, and we do have Social Security and Medicare, and for our seniors, they are absolute necessities. And many of those 47% that do qualify, really, for that hardship, they do need that kind of help. We don't need as big a government as we have. We can get rid of the Department of Education. We can get rid of EPA. Let the states do it. Set some standards and let the states conduct their business. There's a lot of our government we can get rid of. But there's one thing that we must do. We can't fall into that trap where we don't need any taxes. We can just put tariffs on products. We have to become real. We need a finance mechanism that will maintain this great society, but will do it equitably without hurting individuals and, in fact, empower individuals. I see this tax as a freedom tax. We are not free, Michael. We are not free. Even the title to our property. We have custodial title. We don't even own it anymore. It's all now pledged towards our debt with these bankers. And remember one thing, what the original Rothschild banker said. He said, I don't give a damn who makes the laws in the country as long as I handle the money. technology can hit more people. But I'm hoping that the people that are beginning to educate don't fall into the trap that our government really wants, that they're espousing no taxes. It isn't going to work like that. It isn't going to happen like the old colonial days. We didn't have this kind of society.
We have to take another break for commercials. We'll be back in 4 minutes. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're finishing up with former Representative James Traficant. And, James, I find myself in agreement with a great deal of what you've been saying. We know that this government could be far more efficient. We know that this government could be taking the tax money of the American people and spending it on the American people. But instead, our wealth is being stripped off away from us and spent in things that we, the American people, don't agree with. And now that the government is trying to coerce us into agreeing to accept more debt, they're shutting down those parts of the government that we really do need and use and want, access to our national parks, our monuments. Now we're getting word that funds for the food stamp program for November are being frozen until further notice. We're literally being punished for daring to stand up and say no more debt-based economics. We refuse to sell our children and grandchildren into further debt servitude to this private central bank. Before I let you go, are there any websites that you would like our listeners to visit?
Well, I do a little show. It's a blog show on American Free Press on Wednesdays from 11 to 1. And if they want to click in, they can hit the radio tab. But and I write an article every week in American Free Press. It's weekly out of Washington. And that's about the only thing. I think the thing I can say is, after appearing on your show, I think if I make a recommendation to the people who are out there, talk to other people and listen to the Michael Rivero show, I think you do a good job. And I'd heard that, and people had told me that to start, Michael. So it's really a pleasure to talk with someone who's not afraid to speak their mind and is going to talk about the real issues. And no one's talking about those issues today. And one of the other things is, I said on the Greta Van Susteren show, and man, Washington was topsy-turvy. She said, what's the major problem with the country? I said, Israel has a stranglehold on our Congress. They control us. And I said, they control the press and they control the money in this country. And I'm not an anti-Semite. I don't want to see anything bad happen to Israel, but they're pushing us into foreign wars, which we shouldn't be involved with. Our kids are coming back in body bags. We're bankrupt over it, and enough is enough. I think it's time. To tell Israel, look, we're friends, but enough is enough. And see, everybody's afraid to say that, Michael, and this is the problem that we have. And it's continuing to engender and to move towards a stranglehold here. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some precipitous act that gets us into Iran before it's over. Now, I don't want to make a statement that's going to have the CIA in on me here. But look, when you talk about the weapons of mass destruction, you talk about the attack of the Gulf of Tonkin, and all of these things here, and you talk about 9/11, I always look at some elements that perhaps don't quite appear on the surface. And I am concerned that there's going to be some terrorist act that's going to put us at war with Iran. And are you
absolutely agree? Absolutely agree.
And are they saying that, Jim, are you saying that that's going to be Israel? Because you seem to be an anti-Semite. I'm going to say, listen, we've had 2 pairs of spies from Israel that were influencing us to attack Iran. And Eric Holder let the last 2 out without a hearing, for treason, by the way. So I think that our country's got to hear the truth. We've got to know who's pulling the strings around here. Money through the Fed controlling us, but that Israeli power and influence is manifest through all of our society, including the mainstream media, which is hard to believe anymore, Michael. It's hard to believe. So alternative media, if that's what you want to call it, the Michael Rivero show, and shows that are going to talk about these types of things, more people have to listen to. And how we make that happen, I don't know, quite frankly. But if it doesn't happen, I like Pat Buchanan, believe that if we continue on the same path with this communist income tax that's rewarding dependency, with giving us more and more, subsidizing illegitimacy, which, my God, you have kids on the street without fathers, you have a society we can't control. Look, it's just going to be a matter of time.
I absolutely agree with you on that one. And, Jim, we're going to let you go here because I got to wrap up the show before we hit the top of the hour. And, again, it's been a real treat for me because I've been an admirer of yours going all the way back to that 1991 speech that you made about the bankruptcy of the United States. And every one of your dire warnings and prognostications have proven to be absolutely accurate. And I'm also in agreement. This nation and economy cannot last much longer. It's heading for a big crash, and I think we're going to break apart like the former Soviet Union and restart as a confederation. And it's up to we, the American people, to decide now what kind of government and economy and tax system we're going to have, because there's going to be no end of carpetbaggers running around the country trying to restart the same scams all over again, and we have to just be ready to stand firm against them and say, no, you had your chance, you had this little game for 100 years, and you wrecked the place, no more ever again. Jim, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here, and again, that was Representative James Traficant, former Representative James Traficant. And if you're not familiar with the man, go out and do a web search on him. He was in Congress for 9 terms, and he was out there just openly defying Israel's control on the Congress. He was out there openly saying the economic policies of the United States were leading to the nation's destruction. History has shown he was absolutely right. And for being right, for daring to offend Israel, he got hit with this absolutely bogus charge that he was sent to prison for, and then he was kicked out of Congress, because Congress is a very insular society, and you're not allowed in there unless you support Israel and support private central banking. And that's really the heart of why the government no longer represents we the people. And, of course, as we come up to the top of the hour, I want to go back to this question I keep asking all the time as they talk about the debt ceiling. And we must raise the debt ceiling or the food stamps money will not be released next month. And that's now a confirm. We got that from Fox 13 out of Utah. They got a copy of the letter saying the EBT funds, the food stamp money for November, is not being transferred to the states until further notice. They're trying to stampede the food stamp recipients into calling Congress and saying, please raise the debt ceiling, enslave future generations to debt. I don't care. I've got to feed my children. And it's just a very cheap piece of political theater. But why are we even talking about a debt ceiling? The Constitution authorizes the United States government to create and issue an interest-free public currency. So why is this government going to a privately owned central bank to borrow the public currency at interest, thereby enslaving the American people and future generations to hopelessly unpayable debt? That's a question every American needs to be asking. It is the question the federal government hopes you will not ask because they don't have a good answer for it. It's a failed it's a failed banking system. It's the very banking system we fought a revolution to be free of. And the only reason we're back in it is because politicians are corruptible. And if you give them enough power to change your lives, they will change your lives to benefit their financial supporters. As Aaron Russo used to say, your average politician would sell their own mother for $1. Maybe in these inflationary times the price is up to $5, but you get the basic principle. And that's what this strong central government has become, a one-stop shopping center for all the corrupting influence in society. That's why when this nation was first created, the power and authority and control were diffused as much as possible across the land, with power and authority in the local communities, the state governments, and very little in the central government, because the Founding Fathers understood it is the curse of political power. It will attract the very sort of people who should never be allowed to have it. We have wandered far afield from the wisdom of those Founding Fathers, and as we start planning the blueprint for the new America, we need to go back to that wisdom. Power diffused across the land because concentrated power becomes a target for the corruptors. And we've seen with our own eyes that does not work. It has never worked. No nation enslaved to a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest has escaped complete and utter collapse. And on the way to that collapse, the real wealth of the nation, the physical assets, always wind up in the pockets of the bankers. And if you have not read it or seen it, please make a point of hunting down All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, which will tell you that these disastrous global wars are an artifact of this usurious-based way of running a nation's economy. I hear the music out there. It's time for me to get out and accomplish something useful with the rest of the day. We'll be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. John McAfee has confirmed for Thursday in our third hour. Boy, is that going to be a lot of fun talking about Obamacare and the NSA. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.